Hello friends, welcome to my channel Gauri's 3Cs and welcome to this video series on knitting basics where I am sharing some steps and stitches for how to make a baby hat. In the previous videos we learned how to do a basic cast on and also stitch a knit stitch and a purl stitch. In today's video what we will be doing is how to add a color stripe. If you're adding a second color to your project, how would you do that? So let's get on with making adding a color stripe to your project. What we did in the previous videos was we learned how to do a row of knit and then a row of purl, and if you do a row of knit and a row of purl on top of it, what you get is a stockinette stitch. So we have a pattern of stockinette stitch going on. What I will do today is add a color stripe, like I said. So to add a color stripe, you'll start with your second color. Generally, one is called as a main color and the other is called a contrast color. For today's project, I'm just going to call this peach a main color and this one is your contrast color. I'm just adding a stripe of the contrast color. So you start with that. You take your right needle, put that on the top or the first stitch of the row where you're adding it. Tighten the working yarn on your left, between your left fingers. You loop the contrast yarn on the right needle as you're seeing here and keep that looped in and pull that through the top first stitch. Now you loop that through. At this point you need to tie a knot, and the knot should combine your main and contrast colors. So make sure that you have tightened this all the way and combined this into a knot. So take both the working yarn and the contrast yarn and tighten this into a knot. You could do a double knot. Right here as you see it. Once you have this knot well secured, now you have these two strands, both the main yarn and the contrast yarn going to your right. And then you start off with your project, but you should also make sure that your the main yarn stays on top. So if you need to wind it a couple of times and keep this on top, and then start off with your contrast yarn and now start doing your if that row is a knit row, then start doing your knit row with the contrast yarn. As you're seeing now, the new stitches that are getting formed in the contrast color, and when you do a few rows of the contrast color, you'll see that that color has started to also show up along with your project. I will continue to go on with this a little bit and then come back and show you how the contrast yarn looks, and then we'll move on with the rest of the work here. I also want to show you how when you switch rows, how would you go about doing that? How would you switch back from your contrast color to your main color, or when you're going from one row to the other, how you go about doing that. So just continue to show this to you for a little bit. Yeah, right. As you can see here, I've done one row of knit and one row of purl in the contrast color, and as we move forward you can see that the distance or the gap between the main color and the contrast color working yarn is slightly starting to increase. What we need to do as we go up, especially if you are adding more rows, even if you're not adding more rows of the contrast color, you need to start closing the gap between this main color and the contrast color. And the way that you do that is, as you start your next row and you loop, put your right needle on the stitch, on the first stitch, don't start straight away with your contrast yarn and start putting this knits directly. One step that needs to be done is to take the main color working yarn and put that on top of the contrast color working yarn. That way you have made sure that that also travels along with the contrast color yarn upwards. You'll see what I mean when I make a couple of stitches over here. I'll go back and show you how the contrast color yarn and the main color yarn are now traveling together on this side. So let me just finish up a few knit stitches for this row. And as you can see now here, the contrast color yarn is on this row over here on the 5th stitch, and the main color yarn has also kind of come up and is stepping forward or moving upwards as we go. So that's an important step, to keep the contrast color yarn and the main color yarn together as we go. I'll finish this row and show you the same step one more time when we come over to the next row, where we can take the main color and the contrast color yarn upwards together. So moving on, I've completed one row of knit and one row of purl. Again, one row of knit and one row of purl with the contrast yarn. Now, as the next row, I want to stop using the contrast yarn and get back to my main yarn, which means I may need the contrast yarn later. So I need to keep the main yarn on top and then bring the contrast yarn on top of that to make sure it rides along, and then start my row with the main yarn again. So here I'm coming back to my main yarn. The contrast yarn is still on top, and then I'm starting the row back with my main yarn. So as you see, the stitches that are forming onto the right hand side are the ones in the main color, which is the peach color here. So I will, just like the last time, I will finish off with about 5 stitches or so, and then show you how both yarns are riding together. So as you see, this is the working yarn on the stitch number 5, and here is the contrast yarn, which is also come up to the same stitch level, same row level. So that way you are taking it along with you and not leaving it behind as you move forward. I hope you're able to use this to add a touch of color to your project, and this is a technique that you should be able to use on different projects that you make. I hope you like this video. If you do, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on my next one.